Finally, I won't have to see your face anymore. Freeloader, get out! Haha.
You should be grateful that we tolerated your freeloading, parasitic lifestyle until now.
I see. I understand. I'll leave then. Thank you for everything until now. I quickly packed my belongings and left the house where I had been living with my in-laws. I noticed my mother-in-law looking at me with the happiest face as I was leaving. I left looking all sorrowful, but only I knew about what awaited this house next. My name is Emily. I'm a 32-year-old who works from home. It has been 5 years since I married John. We lived happily as a couple, but around our 4th year of marriage, things started to change. My previously healthy father-in-law suddenly fell ill, and we had to start caring for him. Therefore, we moved in with my in-laws. We thought we wouldn't have to live with them for quite some time, but John was an only child. With no siblings to rely on, we inevitably ended up taking care of my father-in-law. I even considered quitting my job for caregiving. However, perhaps because my hard work was recognized, I was allowed to work from home and continue working. Life in my in-laws' house started off hectically, but problems soon arose. Yes, it was the harassment from my mother-in-law. The common mother-in-law and daughter-in-law problems that you often hear about also fell on me. Emily, how long are you going to slack off and leave the housework alone? Get to tidying and preparing the meal already. Mother-in-law, I'm not goofing around, you know. What are you talking about? You're always clicking away at your computer. Surfing the web, you call it? You must be goofing off. Surfing the web? Haha. The idea that being on a computer equals killing time is so old-minded. I was specially granted permission to work from home. I didn't want to waste the skills I had worked hard to acquire, so I worked hard at my job in between household chores and caregiving to maintain my previous income. And it was gratifying when, after about 3 months of desperate effort, I was able to restore my income. The reason why I had to work so hard was because, frankly, it was difficult to get by on John's income alone. Finally, we're going to have some leeway in our lives. I want to save some money. That's what I thought, but for some reason life became harder. It felt like our savings was only decreasing. I wondered why, and when I checked our expenses, it turned out that John was splurging a lot. And I also found out that my mother-in-law was also splurging quite a bit. John has always been a show-off, and he often treats his colleagues to lunch. But recently, he's been using our credit card to treat many colleagues at parties. Of course, if you spend more than you put in the house, it's bound to decrease. My mother-in-law, for her part, takes up multiple hobbies at the invitation of her friends, and she unhesitatingly uses money for class fees and expenses for socializing. With both my husband and my mother-in-law throwing housework and caregiving duties at me, and splurging as they please, I couldn't take it anymore. As I was covering all the living expenses with my income and couldn't even think about saving, I became anxious and decided to talk to my husband and mother-in-law. Both John and mother-in-law, you seem to be spending a lot of money wastefully lately. We're going to run out of savings at this rate, so could you please hold back a bit on spending? Upon saying this, my husband John and my mother-in-law strongly rebutted.
You think I wouldn't care if my colleagues see me as a stingy man? You want me to get looked down upon?
It's okay if you're not always the one to treat them. Besides, even if you don't show off sometimes, they won't think you're stingy.
I'm always considerate towards the people at my office to make sure we all work well together. You wouldn't understand anything about work.
It's fine to treat your colleagues to lunch, But how does taking your colleagues to a girls' bar on your dime relate to work? Aren't you just doing it because you enjoy it?
How do you know that?
You always come home drunk and happily report it yourself, don't you? That's just how much more fun he has compared to talking with you.
Mom, you get it too, right? That's what I meant, haha.
I too attend my classes to spend my dwindling time having fun with my friends. Are you telling me to stay cooped up at home? You're such a terrible wife.
There's no reason for you, who don't even earn a cent and only do housework, to tell me what to do.
Really, what is she thinking? Acting all high and mighty when she's just a housewife. I do work, and you guys know it. I'm earning and contributing to the household, you know. I'm also taking care of your father, not just doing the housework.
Don't lie. My mom takes care of my dad, and since you're not even going to the office, you're not earning much, are you? Who the hell do you think you are? Getting all cocky just because you work part-time.
Stunned, I was at a loss for words. It seems like this mother-son duo really didn't understand that I was truly working and taking care of the house and father-in-law, all while earning. Moreover, my mother-in-law seemed to have told John that she was the one taking care of my father-in-law, making me look like a lazy housewife. I considered leaving several times, but the reason I refrained was, of course, my father-in-law. My father-in-law has always been very kind to me since I got married to John, and he would always say, "Emily, I'm really sorry that a great daughter-in-law like you has to put up with so much." Father-in-law, I don't mind taking care of you. What are you talking about?
I do feel guilty about needing care, but I feel even worse about how my wife and son are treating you. You're being taken advantage of, aren't you?
Well, yes.
With just John's income, we wouldn't be able to maintain a living. I know that it's all thanks to your hard work that we're getting by.
Father-in-law, you knew? It turned out that my father-in-law had been aware of the household situation for a long time. And every time he needed care, he would thank me and speak to me with a kind voice. I loved my father-in-law, and I didn't find taking care of him a burden at all. What if I left this house? I was anxious about who would take care of my beloved father-in-law, so I decided to take care of him diligently until he passed away. And about a year later, my father-in-law passed away. During the funeral of my father-in-law, whom I loved so much, I cried the whole time. Seeing me, my mother-in-law coldly said, "Emily, why are you crying so much?" Without shedding a tear, my mother-in-law showed no signs of grieving for my father-in-law. So of course I replied, "What? My father-in-law has passed away. Of course I would be sad. I've been taking care of him all this time." Upon hearing my response, my mother-in-law exploded in anger. "Gosh, as if I didn't take care of my husband at all!" In reality, my mother-in-law heartily took care of my father-in-law. She took advantage of me, doing neither housework nor caregiving, and claimed she was too busy with her hobbies. Despite that, she always found the time to go out. She played the part of the poor mother-in-law being bullied by her daughter-in-law, even pretending to cry in front of relatives. From the outside, it seems like I was a terrible daughter-in-law, to the point where people said, "Please stop being so harsh on your mother-in-law." Some even sided with her and blamed me. I was merely grieving the death of my father-in-law, yet even strangers blamed me. It pissed me off. I chose to stay away from our relatives. Then John, having noticed me, approached me to complain.
"So, you embarrassed my mom in front of our relatives, huh?"
"What are you talking about? I don't understand. I was just crying and grieving your dad's death. Then your mom came up to me making snide comments. That's all."
"I heard you were talking as if she did nothing for my dad."
I didn't say such a thing. I was just talking about how sad I was that your dad, who I had been taking care of, passed away. Maybe it sounded like I was blaming your mom because she didn't do anything in reality.
Are you looking down on my mom?
No, I'm just telling the truth. And if you're so upset, you should have helped me out. Don't you think you could have taken better care of your own dad?
Why are you blaming me too? I have nothing to do with this.
Nothing to do with this. You're his own son. Didn't you feel any responsibility to take care of him?
I had work. It was your job as a housewife to take care of him.
That makes no sense. I have work too, so that's unfair. Our argument heated up and was broken up by panicked relatives. Although the argument ended there, my husband and I didn't speak for the rest of the day. Later, after all the funeral-related matters were settled, a lawyer spoke about the inheritance.
I'd like to discuss the will concerning the inheritance following your father-in-law's death. It is written that the rights to the family home and the land will go to his son John, while the remaining money will be split evenly between his wife and his daughter-in-law Emily.
What? Why would Emily get a part of the inheritance? I'm his wife, right? If John gets the land and the house, shouldn't the rest of the assets all be mine?
Your husband expressed his gratitude to Emily, who dedicated herself to his care. It is his wish to leave her part of the inheritance as a token of that gratitude. This is a decision made by your husband, and it cannot be overturned.
So that's it. Oh, I see. Emily was only taking care of him because she was after the inheritance. Why would you say that? It must be. Why else would she dedicate herself to caregiving? I've had a good relationship with my father-in-law ever since we got married. I took care of him to repay his kindness. If you think it's impossible, why did you push the caregiving onto me, mother-in-law? How can you belittle me like that? Don't talk crap. I get it now, so keep your mouth shut. With our lawyer present, my mother-in-law couldn't say anything inappropriate, so she continued with a frustrated expression. So he decided that. Well, it's a token of appreciation for caregiving. I guess there's no other way. Then the lawyer continued with the discussion.
May I continue? Your father-in-law left a note saying that Emily no longer needs to take care of him.
At that moment, my mother-in-law's face, which had been bitter up to then, suddenly lit up with a smile. That's it! That's what it means. I understand now.
Huh? What do you mean?
Confused by his mother's excitement, my husband seemed completely at a loss. It means that Emily is no longer needed in this house, since she won't have to take care of my husband. The reason for dividing the inheritance was just severance pay, not gratitude. My mother-in-law twisted my father-in-law's will according to her own speculations. My mother-in-law misunderstood my father-in-law's will as my father-in-law and I had intended it to be misunderstood. Actually, there was a discussion between my father-in-law and me while he was still alive. My father-in-law wished to set me free from this house after his death. He planned to use his will to fool my husband and mother-in-law, allowing me to leave the house without any trouble. And just as my father-in-law intended, my mother-in-law, who was completely fooled, is trying to kick me out. While making sure they did not catch on to my true feelings, I pretended to be shocked by the will, saying, "Oh, Father, why would you do such a thing? See, even my husband didn't see you as his precious daughter-in-law. John, you don't need Emily anymore, do you? Just divorce her already." John, you wouldn't say something like divorce, right? I looked at John with tearful eyes. After a long pause,
Indeed, it seems better to divorce,
he finally said.
Me, I've received the family property and Mom has got the money. I don't need to worry about care in the future, and I won't have any trouble with Emily.
What? I see.
That's how it is. Sorry, but could you leave me?
Understood. I guess there's no place for me anymore here, I meekly said as I took a piece of paper from my drawer and handed it to my husband. When we had a fight before, there was one time I went to pick this up. That, of course, was the divorce papers. My husband immediately signed the divorce papers. Finally, I don't have to see your face. A freeloader who doesn't work. Get out, haha.
Appreciate that I put up with a parasite like you all this time.
I see. Okay, I'll leave. Thank you for everything so far. Speaking of which, since the lawyer is here, I want to discuss. It's okay if there's no property division, right? I've received enough from my father-in-law's inheritance.
That's right. How considerate of you, Emily. I've been able to live on my earnings. It would be brazen of you to want more.
Well, you're right. All right, the discussion is over. Please leave this house as soon as possible. I quickly packed my belongings and left the house where I had been living. My mother-in-law was watching me leave with a joyous face beyond words, not knowing what awaited in this house. After leaving the in-laws' house, I immediately submitted the divorce papers to the city hall. Arriving at the apartment I had rented in advance, I shouted in the wide room alone. Yes, I've finally been set free! I'm free! I just couldn't help but yell. I was so happy to be free from the painful married life. I can't thank my father-in-law enough, who planned the escape from that house. Since then, I've been enjoying a too comfortable life alone. I adapted to working remotely at my in-laws' place. But now that I left, I now have much more time to dedicate to my work. My income has increased due to that, and I'm able to live a luxurious life without being disturbed by anyone. One day, I got a call from my ex-husband, John. It's been a while. What brings you to call me?
Emily, please help us. We're having a tough time making ends meet.
Is this some kind of joke? Weren't you the ones who told me to get lost?
Even though we're getting the same salary as before, for some reason we don't have enough money. We can't live like this.
Oh dear, haha, that does sound tough. I decided to drop the final bombshell. Well, that's because my salary isn't going into the household anymore.
What do you mean?
Don't you understand? You couldn't afford your lifestyle just with your salary. All those splurging, and you never noticed?
I couldn't afford our lifestyle with my salary alone?
Of course not. You've always been squandering all your salary on yourself. The only reason we could get by was because of the money I was bringing in. You and your mother at your ages, your habit of spending is just ridiculous.
What? So how much were you making, Emily?
Let me see. Back then, it was around $4,800 a month, I guess.
You were making that much?
Yes, I was. Bet you didn't know that, did you? By the way, now that I don't have any hindrances, I'm making even more. Haha. Even over the phone, I could tell my ex-husband was shaken.
Emily, how about we live together again?
Huh?
It was a mistake to kick you out. It's not too late to start over, right?
What are you talking about? It's obvious you're just after my earnings.
No, that's not it. I've realized that I still love you, Emily.
Don't talk nonsense. I have no desire to return to your place. By the way, what happened to the inheritance your mother received? You should have plenty left from that, right?
Well, it's nearly run out.
There's no way. She got about $100,000, right? There's no way you could have spent all of it in such a short period of time.
We enjoyed shopping and overseas trips. Also, we lost nearly half of it in casinos.
Both of you are just hopeless. I'm speechless. I'm a stranger now. I can't do anything about it, and I don't want to.
But don't say such cold things. Help us.
I don't care. I'm ending this call. Don't call me again. With that, I hung up the phone and immediately canceled the contract of his phone. I have no idea what happened to my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law after losing all means of communication. However, when I passed by their house nearly a year after that phone call, the place had been demolished. They must have had to let go of the house due to financial troubles. Well, it's none of my business anyway. As for me, I decided to spend my newfound free time on a new hobby and started attending a wine class that I had been interested in. There, I met a man 2 years older than me who was actively pursuing me. After a year and a half of dating, we got married. He's a humble and warm-hearted man who is a rising star at a well-known company and earns a high salary. He respects my work, and we have a happy married life where we respect each other. Lately, I've been thinking that perhaps this reward was a gift from my father-in-law.
Hey, Mom, bring me a beer.
Huh? Mother-in-law, did you lose your hearing all of a sudden?
You can hear me, right? Hey, I told you to bring me a beer.
This is how it always goes when my son and his wife speak to me. We've been living together for 5 years, and they've never listened to me, always ignoring what I have to say. When they do speak to me, it's always just orders, like I'm some sort of maid. Jean, my daughter-in-law, speaks ill of me for everyone to hear, and Paul, my son, treats me like a housekeeper without a second thought. Ignoring them, I turn my back and pretend to watch the TV, acting as if I can't hear them. I'm at the end of my tether with these two, who only listen when they want something, but ignore me otherwise. After a while of ignoring them, Jean picks up the TV remote and shuts off the show I was watching. Startled, I looked up when she said loudly right into my ear, "Hey, mother-in-law, can you hear me? Make sure you prepare Paul's lunch tomorrow, got it?" Her voice was so loud that it made my ears ring and I involuntarily grimaced. Seeing this, my daughter-in-law laughed, saying, "Seems like you heard it," and left the living room with my son. Wouldn't she at least try to be a bit more considerate since I am, after all, her husband's mother and she relies on me on a daily basis? That's what I thought. But judging from my son's attitude, I'm probably nothing more than a housemaid in her eyes. In the end, there was no apology from the two of them, nor did I feel any consideration towards me. Feeling frustrated, I sent an email to my husband and decided to leave the house. My name is Karen. I will be turning 72 this year. 5 years ago, my son and his wife asked if they could live with me because they were worried about the future and wanted to save money. Ever since then, we have been living together as two families under one roof.
If you live with us, you'll feel safer, right, Mom?
You might be right. My husband is a workaholic who started his own company when he was young and continues to work tirelessly, even at the age of 73. Because of his nature, the house felt quiet ever since our son moved out. Even when I consulted my husband about our son and his wife moving in with us, his only response was,
"Do whatever you like."
So as there wasn't much conversation and I felt a bit bored, I agreed to live together, hoping that life would become a bit more lively. When we started living together, Jean, my son's wife, and I split our housework. However, as she started saying, "My part-time job is getting busier," the workload for me gradually increased. Although she helps out when asked, she often does so reluctantly, goes out on her days off, or lazes around in her room, so I stopped asking for her help. I ended up taking on all the household tasks, and it became the norm, making me feel unappreciated. Even during meal times when the whole family is present, there is hardly any conversation. I suppose I've been numb to this, as it was the same way with my husband. One day, while I was preparing dinner for 3 as usual, I received a message from my husband saying, "I'll be late for work. Don't need dinner." This was not unusual, but the problem was with my son and his wife.
Dad's coming home late, huh? I don't eat dinner either.
Oh, I'm going out with a friend, so I don't need it either. Why are you telling me this now? I've already made it, I exclaimed.
It's fine, just leave it for tomorrow.
Despite it being dinner time, if I didn't say anything, they were about to go without a word. They could have told me if I didn't need to prepare them dinner in the first place. As long as they weren't inconvenienced, they would never even reach out to me first. I couldn't help but complain at their rudeness, but they left without a hint of remorse. What am I working so hard for? In the quiet living room, I was staring blankly at the dinner I had already prepared, which would now go to waste. What on earth am I doing? Thinking about it made me feel utterly exhausted. I covered the still warm dinner with plastic wrap, put it in the fridge, and decided to go to bed. The next morning when I came down to the living room, my husband, who had woken up earlier, apologized, saying,
I'm sorry.
As usual, our exchange was brief. It should have ended there, but seeing the look on my face, my husband furrowed his brows slightly and asked,
Didn't Paul and his wife eat dinner?
Huh? No, they said they didn't eat dinner and went out.
I see.
I guess he saw the dinner for 3 in the fridge and asked. I was happy to have a conversation after a long time, so I told my husband about what happened last night. My reticent husband sat quietly, listening to me. After hearing me out, he gently said,
You don't have to push yourself.
He acknowledged,
Our son's attitude is getting worse day by day.
But if I don't take care of the house, nobody will, right?
That doesn't mean you have to overdo it.
His words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I realized that I had been pushing myself, and was happy that my husband understood this. My son and his wife aren't small children anymore, so there was no need for me to work so hard. With that thought, my view of the situation seemed to brighten.
I might be late from work again, so you don't need to prepare dinner for me tonight.
Okay, I said, smiling at my husband's words. I decided to let my son and his wife understand this as well. Despite it being a Sunday, I waved goodbye to my husband and resolved to rebel against my son and his wife. After my husband left, my son and his wife finally woke up in the afternoon. Still in their pajamas, they came into the living room and immediately asked,
What's for lunch?
Why don't you eat what's left from yesterday?
But you could at least warm it up for us, or set it on the table.
You're not small children, you can do it yourself. Well, mother-in-law, you are getting old, aren't you? Jean, my daughter-in-law, joked with a laugh, which prompted Paul, my son, to join in the laughter while looking at me. I'm exhausted because Jean hasn't been helping with the housework at all. Oh, can't you manage without me? Is it your menopause or something? Jean retorted, laughing at me. I could only sigh at their attitudes. The two of them went back to their room without cleaning up after eating, seemingly unbothered. As expected, my husband didn't return until late that night. Since I didn't need to prepare dinner for my husband, I bought myself a ready-made meal from the supermarket.
Huh, Mom? What are you eating?
Ready-made food.
What about dinner?
I don't know. Mother-in-law, what are you thinking? Have you forgotten about your family? I wondered if Jean was incapable of having a conversation without throwing in some barb. I decided to ignore my daughter-in-law, which seemed to quiet Paul down. However, he quickly picked up his phone and started complaining again.
You don't work, Mom. You should at least take care of the house.
I thought that since it was their day off, they could prepare their own meals for once. As I thought this, they decided to order a delivery.
Give us the money later,
Paul said, which made me lose my patience. Since they wanted to save, I agreed to not let them pay our living expense, and I never bothered them about it. But I never imagined them to take advantage of me like this. I decided to ignore them completely, not providing any services to my son and daughter-in-law, who showed such disrespect.
Hey, Mom, beer.
Oh, has mother-in-law suddenly gone deaf?
You can hear us, right? We're asking for beer,
Paul demanded, while Jean kept on making snide remarks, and Paul talked to me like I was their housemaid. Ignoring them, I turned my back and deliberately watched TV, pretending not to hear. When I didn't respond for a while, she seemed to give up and stop talking to me. But this peace was short-lived. Before I knew it, my daughter-in-law, who had come up behind me, picked up the TV remote and turned off the TV. Startled, I looked up, only for her to shout into my ear, "Hey, mother-in-law, can you hear me? Make sure to prepare lunch for Paul tomorrow, okay?" Her voice was so loud that it hurt my ears, making me wince involuntarily. Looking at me, my daughter-in-law laughed, saying, "Looks like she heard me," and left the living room with Paul. I wondered why she didn't consider showing a bit of courtesy, given that I'm her husband's mother and she depends on me regularly. But observing Paul's attitude, it seemed like I was nothing more than a housemaid to her. As it turned out, there was no sign of consideration for me at all, and I didn't even hear an apology for last night's dinner from either of them. Sighing deeply, I sent a text to my husband and decided to leave the house. Early next morning, I packed my belongings and left the house before they woke up. When I arrived at a nearby business hotel, my phone was filled with texts from Paul, who seemed to have just woken up before heading to work. Apparently, they were in quite a chaos this morning. Texts and calls from both of them quickly filled my phone with notifications. When I opened the text, I saw nothing but complaints, such as,
"What are you doing? I told you I'll need lunch."
Jean also sent a text in a mocking tone. "Are you wandering around after forgetting your responsibilities?" It seemed they had a hard time just because I didn't prepare breakfast for them, which made me laugh a little. When I saw a call from Paul, who seemed to be on his lunch break, I decided to finally talk to him.
"You finally picked up. Mom, where the hell are you and what are you doing?"
"It's none of your business, is it?"
"You didn't even prepare our food. Where are you?"
"Paul, you're not a child. You can make your own food, can't you?" I answered him with a mix of irritation. If he had struggled so much to prepare just one meal, he should have reflected a little and thanked me. But to my surprise, he came back with a word I never expected.
"I'm paying for living expenses, so I need you to do the housework."
"Living expenses? What are you talking about? I never received such a thing."
"Huh? Why not? Jean should have been giving it to you every month, so don't lie."
Paul insisted that he was paying me living expenses. I've never received anything of the sort, and when I truthfully denied it, Paul started calling me a liar. The truth is, my husband covers all of their living expenses, including their food expenses. Even after repeatedly saying this, Paul refused to believe me. I could hear Jean in the background saying, "You're probably just playing dumb and spending it for yourself." Unable to continue the conversation, I cut them off and said, "I don't know what I don't know, and I don't plan to come home for a while."
"Why not? What are we supposed to do for food?"
"Figure it out yourselves. Bye now." I hung up the phone and let out another big sigh. Why do they believe they're not in the wrong, even after all this? I didn't understand what Paul was talking about earlier, when he mentioned about our living expenses. The situation improved about a week after I left the house. My husband, who had come to check on me, apparently talked to Paul and Jean, and their text suddenly became more respectful and submissive. Wondering what had happened, I received a text from my husband.
"Paul and Jean want to apologize. If you feel like it, please come home."
Thanks to my husband's talk, they finally seemed to understand. I replied to my husband's text, made preparations, and decided to go home that day. When I returned home, Paul and Jean were waiting at the entrance, their faces pale and worn out. It seems that they were quite upset by the lecture from my husband. I decided to hear the story about this past week from them and my husband.
"About the living expenses I mentioned on the phone."
"I said I didn't receive them, right? You said you wanted to save money, so I didn't say anything."
"Actually, Dad was really mad at us about that."
It seems that my son had told his father about his contribution to the household expenses. It appeared that he believed I had been lying, and throughout, he seemed to have painted me as the villain when speaking with his father. However, when his father explained that there was no way I could be splurging, as I was busy from morning to night with cleaning, shopping, preparing meals for 3 people, and doing the laundry while showing him our household book, he quieted down. You couldn't even believe me?
But Jean kept saying that she was giving you the money.
So what happened to your living expenses? I was using them. From my son's perspective, he was definitely paying the money, so he must have been baffled that the money was not reaching me. It seems that my husband and son confronted Jean and made her confess. At first, Jean was playing dumb, but when my husband started yelling at her, she finally confessed everything. I was shocked to hear this, as I had never seen my husband yell before. Apparently, Jean had been spending the money on dining out and going out with her colleagues from her part-time job. She had been going to fancy restaurants to show off and pocketing any leftover money for herself, she explained in a feeble voice. I'm appalled. She was accusing me of squandering money on the phone, but it turns out she was just talking about herself. But living with my in-laws can be stifling, and everyone was inviting me, so I
Just because of that, you thought it was okay to embezzle our living expenses. You made me look like a fool too.
What? You are acting all high and mighty too. At the point when the two of them began to stray from the topic and argue, my husband cleared his throat loudly. The two of them, seemingly terrified of my husband, jumped up in surprise and immediately became silent. I couldn't help but laugh at their behavior, like children who had been caught doing mischief.
Excuses. Cut the crap. First, you should sincerely apologize to your mom. Dad, I was also deceived by Jean. So, does that excuse your attitude towards your mother? Neither of you has apologized to her since she returned. I'm sorry.
Finally, the two of them bowed their heads to me. Still, my son was making excuses, saying that he had been taking it easy because it was his home.
I've been getting busy at work, and I just wanted to relax at home. So what about your mother, who is being taken for granted and mocked by her big son and his wife even at her own home?
My husband's words cut through my son's excuses, leaving him speechless. I'm appalled at my son, who despite his age still relies on his parents, and at Jean, who took advantage of that to embezzle money.
Mom, I'm sorry. You see, I'm apologizing to you.
Do you think an apology makes everything okay? Please reflect on yourself a bit. The two of them thought that bowing their heads to me would resolve everything smoothly, and they were flustered by my words and tried to make excuses. But I could see through their scheme, and I shook my head. Whether you contribute to the living expenses or not, I can't overlook that attitude. You have to learn to be more grateful. But aren't you worried about your future too, mother-in-law? Yes, I'm full of worries about relying on people like you.
How can you talk to us like that?
You splurged our living expense out of stress from living with us. I can't have someone like you stay with us any longer. The two of them finally quieted down, realizing that I was not willing to listen anymore. They need to learn once again how rude their actions were while living together as a couple. Later, we managed to have them move out. In the days that followed, Jean, my son's wife, started to come to our house occasionally to learn household chores from me. She continually vented about how my son Paul did not lift a finger to help with any housework. As she had always been showing off to her colleagues, I assumed she couldn't complain to anyone else now. I now understand just how much I relied on you, Karen. Indeed. And yet, you had the audacity to accuse me of being deaf and squandering money. Being no longer able to live with us and having lost the pocket money she freely used before, plus having her part-time wages limited to make up for the money she previously misused, Jean fervently complained about her now austere life. But however I listened, all I could think was that she was just reaping what she had sown. As for Paul, he started to bring home delicious snacks as gifts from time to time, as if making up for his previous lack of consideration, which he still mentioned occasionally. I've always known he wasn't the most articulate and was primarily focused on work. Nevertheless, I was touched by the fact that he recognized my hard work during our discussions with Paul and Jean. Thanks for your hard work, honey. I appreciate it. I'm glad that I can talk to my husband like this again. I deeply feel the truth in the saying, after a storm comes a calm. Regardless of how it started, I'm now leading a life that is calmer and happier than before.
It all started on a bitterly cold night when snow was swirling in the air. Out of nowhere, my cell phone rang. Picking it up, I was greeted by the wrathful voice of my mother-in-law on the other end. "It's because of you that my daughter's in this state. Her face is unrecognizable. It's atrocious. You need to take responsibility. Why did you abandon my daughter? You're despicable." My name is Amy, and I'm 33 years old. I live with my husband, Zach. Zach has his parents and an older sister. That single phone call from my mother-in-law that night turned my life upside down. "Give me back my lively girl! Why did you do something so horrible? I swear, I'll make you pay for this. I'll never forgive you." My mother-in-law, possibly out of shock, was making no sense. All she did was spew venom at me. "Mother-in-law, please calm down. I have no idea what you're talking about." Even in my confusion, I tried my best to console my mother-in-law, desperately trying to listen to what she had to say. But all my efforts were futile. "You have no right to be calm at a time like this. It's all your fault. And yet, you have the audacity to say such things. Why didn't you help her? Why did you abandon her?" My mother-in-law was just yelling loudly while crying, and there was no conversation at all. Even when I told her to speak slowly, it was like my voice was not reaching her ears, and my mother-in-law's vitriol continued endlessly. My father-in-law, who seemed to have been behind my mother-in-law, took over the phone. "Amy, I hope you understand what you've done. Do you understand the state our daughter is in now? Fortunately, her life is not in danger, but she has severe injuries. Why did you let her suffer like this?" Since my father-in-law was a little calmer, I honestly told him, "Father, I'm sorry. I really don't understand what you two are talking about. What on earth happened?" He looked perplexed that I knew nothing, but somehow I got him to tell me the story. It was content that made me doubt my ears. My sister-in-law, a single mother, was living with her young child about a 20-minute walk from my home. She had a young boyfriend who she had been dating for some time, and he frequently visited. I had heard from Zach that he had a quick temper and had often raised his hand to my sister-in-law. Apparently, his mood was bad last night, and my sister-in-law suffered from more violence than usual. She felt danger to their lives, so she picked up her child in a frenzy and ran out of the house into the falling snow. Without anywhere to go, my sister-in-law thought of her brother, who had lived nearby, and ran desperately, hoping to find refuge at our house. When my sister-in-law rang the doorbell, Zach, who was home at the time, answered. My sister-in-law stood outside the door, holding her child in her only clothes, her face bruised and gasping for breath. Anyone would have known at first glance that something was wrong, but Zach did not show concern for his own sister. Instead, he seemed a bit irritated and said, "If I let people in without permission, Amy will get mad. Sorry, but can you go home? She's scary when she's angry. You understand, right? Please leave," and turned her away from the door. My sister-in-law couldn't believe what her real brother had said, but she was in immediate danger and needed to hide somewhere, so she begged him in tears. "At least lend me money for a hotel." She had left in a panic and didn't have her cell phone or wallet. But Zach said something even more astonishing. "There's no way I have that kind of money. There's money in the house, but there's no way Amy would let me use it without permission. If I did something like that, she'd divorce me. Sorry, but could you try somewhere else? It's cold, so I'm going in. See you." And he closed the door, coldly sending my sister-in-law away. In utter despair, holding her young child, fearing that the two of them would freeze to death, she trudged back through the snow and reluctantly returned home, only to be met with even worse violence from her enraged boyfriend. My sister-in-law was beaten until her face was unrecognizable, and the child was kicked and lost consciousness. She tried to stop him by clinging to her boyfriend, but the violence only escalated, and her screams echoed through the neighborhood, along with the sound of breaking dishes and things being destroyed. A passerby who heard this and realized something was wrong reported it to the police. After that, my sister-in-law and her child, who had been beaten all over and collapsed, were found and immediately taken to the hospital in an ambulance. Now, although they are conscious, they are seriously injured and have been hospitalized with a prognosis of 1 month for full recovery. I got home late last night because of work, and my sister-in-law did not come after I got home. If I had been there, I would have never turned her away. If I had seen my sister-in-law in that state, I think I would have immediately judged it to be dangerous, let her in, and then called the police. I don't understand why it is believed among my in-laws that I was the one who turned her away. And on top of the shock that such a terrible thing happened to my sister-in-law, I couldn't organize the reality that my in-laws were crying and blaming me for this, and I was very confused. Despite my father-in-law's relentless accusations, I knew I had to clear up the misunderstanding. Frantically, I explained. I wasn't home when sister-in-law came by. I worked late last night at the cafe I run. Had I been home, I would have noticed her unusual behavior and let her in. I would never turn her away. Please give me some time to figure out what happened. Although he wasn't convinced, he seemed to cool down and hung up the phone. That day, I was working late at my cafe, developing a new menu. I had informed Zach about the expected time I'd be home, but I ended up working longer. I ended up missing the last subway and had to take a taxi, not arriving home until past midnight. When I got home, I saw Zach, but he didn't mention a thing about his sister. I was confused about why he had done what he had, so I confronted him after he came home from work that night. His response was shocking. I could tell something was wrong when she showed up, but I was just about to enjoy my beer, and it was cold outside, so I wanted to close the door quickly. Plus, I didn't think there was anything I could do about it. I couldn't hide my anger at his selfish excuse. Didn't you feel anything seeing her like that? Why couldn't you at least let her in? She's been through a lot since you turned her away. When I detailed his sister's current condition, he justified himself by saying, "Remember how you used to complain when my parents dropped in without notice? I thought I was being considerate by not letting her in, thinking you wouldn't like it. What did I do wrong?" Turns out, he had assumed that I would be bothered if his sister showed up unannounced and turned her away. I asked him another question. Why didn't you lend her any money? You could have done that much, couldn't you? He responded, I was taken aback when she asked for money. I'm short on cash right before payday. I just lost money playing slots recently, and I hardly had $10 in my wallet. If I gave her our household money, I knew you would get mad, so I refused. I don't see anything wrong with what I said. I was speechless, completely shocked. I had always thought he was a bit self-centered, but he also had many good qualities. I had been giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I realized it was a terrible mistake. He was incapable of making sound decisions because he always put himself first. He had no compassion for others, not even a bit of kindness. And he was foolish enough to prioritize his drinking over his own sister's distress. But it was too late to realize this now. He didn't seem to feel guilty or responsible at all about his sister being rushed to the hospital. From my perspective, she would have ended up like this anyway, no matter where she ran off to. On the bright side, she's safe in the hospital now. We're both safe. All thanks to me, right? He was talking about it as if it was someone else's business. His heartless remarks were making me feel like I was losing my sanity, so I decided not to talk to him any longer. Holding back my anger, I reported to my father-in-law about Zach's irresponsible behavior towards his sister the previous night. Upon hearing my words, Zach's father lost his composure. In a fit of rage, he exclaimed, "There's no way my Zach would do such a thing to his own sister! You're lying! Stop making up stories, Amy! Are you trying to make Zach the worst just to escape your own guilt? If you're going to spew such nonsense, then show me some proof." He refused to listen to me at all, and again blamed me for everything. I endured his accusations while desperately trying to figure out how to prove my innocence. If things remained this way, I would be branded a monster, while Zach, the real culprit who drove his sister away, would live on without any sense of guilt or retribution. This was a situation I could not tolerate. I remembered that my sister-in-law had arrived at our home around 9 p.m. that night. After much thought, I found something that could prove my innocence. My shop was equipped with a security camera. The footage clearly showed me working alone until around 11 p.m. that night. Armed with this footage and another piece of evidence, a taxi receipt that showed the time I got home, I went to my in-laws and proved that I wasn't at home at the time. I was at my shop when your daughter came home. Do you believe me now? It was probably something they didn't want to believe, but faced with clear evidence, they had no choice but to accept it. Zach's father, his hand trembling, muttered, "So, Amy wasn't home then." Despite their shock, Zach's parents hurriedly called him in to uncover the truth about that night. The moment he arrived, they fiercely demanded, "Why did you drive your sister away?" Just as he had done with me, Zach tried to deflect all blame onto me, claiming that he thought I would dislike having his sister in our home. Hearing this, his father said, "We already know that Amy wasn't home at that time, but your sister says she saw a woman in the house. How do you explain that, Zach?" I was speechless. If there was another woman in our home at 9 p.m., there was only one possible explanation. Wait, Zach, what is going on? Who is this woman? I asked him, my voice shaking. Zach's face turned pale as he squirmed under the questioning from both his parents and me, until he finally confessed everything. When I told him I would be late because I was working on a new menu, he saw it as an opportunity to bring his mistress home. He knew I often came home after midnight when I was immersed in my work, so he felt safe in inviting her over. When his sister suddenly showed up, asking to be let in, he panicked and drove her away for fear of his affair being discovered. "You fool! Not only did you betray Amy, but you also left your only sister out in the snow! What were you thinking? Why didn't you lend her any money? Explain yourself!" His father's anger was overwhelming, and Zach confessed the real reason he hadn't given her any money. He actually had plenty of spending money left, but he didn't want to lend it because then he wouldn't be able to buy the bag and shoes he wanted to give his mistress. He didn't want to upset his mistress for the sake of his sister, so he wanted to get rid of her quick, which led to shutting the door on her, Zach admitted. I was furious, but Zach's parents were even more so. "Before being a brother or a husband, you lack basic human decency. It's our responsibility as parents that you grew up to be this kind of person. But we cannot tolerate this and maintain our relationship. From today, we are cutting ties with you. Don't ever show your face to us again." Zach's father disowned him. In a similar vein, I added, "I'm divorcing you. You cheated on me and put your sister's life at risk by leaving her out in the snow. I can't live with someone like you anymore." Zach was shocked at being disowned and confronted with a divorce, all at once, and started begging for forgiveness, crying, I'm sorry! I won't do it again! Please forgive me!" He clung to his father's leg, but his father simply shook him off. "What you did is the absolute worst thing in our eyes." His parents and I never forgave Zach. Apparently, he had been having an affair with the other woman for a year now. The mistress was a coworker at Zach's company, who he'd been secretly bringing to our house when I wasn't around. It was infuriating to learn I'd been betrayed behind my back for so long. Zach even tried to blame his treatment of my sister-in-law on me, which only added to my anger, so I had no second thoughts about divorcing him. I made Zach sign the divorce papers and immediately submitted them. Right after, I headed to a law firm, hired a lawyer, and filed for substantial damages from both Zach and his mistress. I also called Zach's boss, who had been our matchmaker at our wedding, and reported through my tears that we were getting a divorce. I told him everything about Zach's affair and his mistress. Zach's boss, a man who despised anything against human decency, had repeatedly told Zach at our wedding to never betray his wife. As expected, he was furious when he learned about Zach's infidelity. Word reached upper management, and on his boss's advice, Zach was transferred to a branch office in the countryside. His mistress was moved to a different department where she was made to sort documents all day. However, my sister-in-law's revenge against the two was even more ruthless. Still suffering from the after effects of her injuries, she deeply resented Zach's actions that day. To vent her hatred, she did something even more extreme than what I did. By coincidence, she was working at one of Zach's company's clients and knew some of Zach's colleagues. Using her connections, she revealed and spread within the company the cruelty she and her child had suffered that day. The company's employees, who had thought the divorce was due only to the affair, were shocked to learn the truth. Zach's abandonment of his own sister to cover up his affair was a huge shock to everyone in the company. The rumor quickly spread throughout the company, and Zach was universally suspected of being a terrible human being. Once he was ostracized by everyone, his work was impacted, and after a while, he was demoted. He couldn't stand being avoided by everyone and found it hard to continue working at his new post, so he ended up quitting. To pay me the high alimony, he drained his savings and is still paying me by working live-in part-time jobs. Almost all his salary goes towards the payment, and I've heard he can't even afford a coat for winter and shivers in thin t-shirts. As for the mistress, she was stubbornly clinging to her job, amidst the judgmental glances of her coworkers, despite my demand for damages. After consulting my lawyer, I decided to ask her parents for the payment. When her parents learned about it, they were shocked and immediately made their daughter pay the full amount after confirming the facts. I kept receiving calls from her, which I never answered, but she left numerous abusive messages in my voicemail, saying, "Why did you tell my parents? I had to go into debt to make the payments. My life is ruined because of you." As I found it unbearable, I sent these messages to her parents. I received an apology letter later, promising they would never let their daughter trouble me again, and the harassing phone calls stopped. As for my sister-in-law, her abusive boyfriend's actions became a police matter, and she was able to file for damages for her injuries. It had been tough, but she finally managed to break up with him. My in-laws and sister-in-law apologized to me for initially suspecting me and for Zach's infidelity. Of course, both were painful experiences for me, but I could understand their outrage and loss of composure when they saw their daughter taken away in an ambulance after such severe abuse. After all, Zach's affair wasn't their fault. I didn't hold a grudge against them. On the contrary, I wanted them to properly heal the emotional wounds of my sister-in-law and her child, who had such a terrible experience. If I were in their shoes, I'm sure my parents would have reacted the same way. Furthermore, my in-laws and sister-in-law are fundamentally decent people. Now that I've divorced Zach, I'll probably never see them again, as they are now strangers to me. But I sincerely wish them well and hope they take care of themselves. I moved closer to the cafe I run. Since it's within walking distance, I no longer have to worry about the last train, and I can devote my time to coming up with new menu ideas. Though I was thrown around by unexpected events, I probably wouldn't have been happy if I continued to be married. There are things one must never do as a human being. I firmly intend to always keep that in mind and live a life I can be proud of. That's what I strongly believe. My husband betrayed me. My girlfriend is having a baby, so pack up and leave. He coldly told me so. Are you sure you won't regret this? No way. Just get out of here, he sneered, laughing off my final plea. If that's how he wants to play it, I no longer have any obligation to consider his feelings. I accepted the divorce and moved back to my parents' house. But at that time, I didn't know what was coming next. Who could have imagined that the very next day, he'd be at my door, begging for forgiveness? My name is Lily. My father is an executive at a publicly traded company. After graduating from university, I got a job at a company run by one of my father's acquaintances. It was nepotism, yes, but I worked hard to learn the job so as not to be the subject of gossip. Eventually, my colleagues and seniors began to accept me. I even started to enjoy my work, spending my days in a fulfilling way. Meanwhile, my father seemed worried that I, being totally devoted to work and lacking any romantic relationship, was living a one-sided life. He introduced me to a man named John, who was the most capable among his subordinates, and arranged a dating between us. John is the most successful young man in the team. No, it's all thanks to my superiors and seniors who guide me. My father and John seemed to trust each other. At first, I agreed to date John out of respect for my father, but as I got to know him, I began to think that marrying him might bring happiness. As we went on several dates, I admired how he took the lead. Yes, I was gradually drawn to John. Once my father realized how I felt, he encouraged our marriage. John, honestly, what do you think of my daughter? Well, I am dating her with the intention of marriage. Everything progressed smoothly after John announced his intention to marry me in front of my father. Every time they met, my father and John would happily discuss wedding venues and plans for a new home. Seeing my father like this made me feel that getting married might not be a bad idea. Before our marriage, John gave me a condition. I want you to quit your job and become a full-time housewife. I was reluctant to give up my beloved job, but I really wanted to marry him, so I decided to accept his condition. As soon as we got married, John's attitude towards me changed. To be honest, I didn't want to get married this early. I couldn't believe what I heard. Huh? But you were considering marriage. That's why you agreed to meet me. I only agreed because your father asked me to. I can't refuse my boss's request, can I? John continued with a frown. With your father so enthusiastic, how could I refuse to marry you? Besides, marrying you should secure my career advancement. So you married me for a career advancement? Of course! Why else would I marry a boring woman like you? He scoffed. I was left speechless. I had quit my job and had no income. I had lost my confidence and couldn't retort. Eventually, he stopped coming home and began to frequently go out drinking. When I asked where he was going, he simply said, "It's none of your business." From the perfume he smelled of when he came, it was clear he was seeing women nearly every night. Yet he showed no signs of having an affair with a particular woman. It was probably just business related. I convinced myself. As the wife of a capable man, I thought I had to tolerate this kind of behavior. I tried not to think about it as much as possible. Still, it was a fact that I was struggling with a marriage full of forbearance. I wanted to spill all my troubles to someone, but having quit my job and distanced myself from my friends, I had no one to confide in. If I turned to my family, my father would surely worry excessively, and it might affect John's work. I had no choice but to suffer in silence. Around this time, John was promoted to a division manager at an unusually fast pace. I was glad I hadn't brought up anything strange to my father. Hearing about his promotion was a relief to me. With the promotion confirmed, John had been in good spirits at home lately. Although he still rarely came home, the reduction in his sarcastic remarks and criticisms alone was a blessing. However, I realized that John's cheerfulness was not only due to his promotion. While he was in the bath, I accidentally saw a notification on his unlocked phone. I had so much fun today. I miss you already, even though we just parted. I'm looking forward to our sleepover this weekend. It was a message filled with heart symbols. A message clearly from someone he was having an affair with. The text read, "This weekend is a sleepover." He had told me, "I won't be home this weekend due to a business trip." After confirming John's infidelity, I checked the name of the sender. The sender of the message was someone named Kathy. Afterwards, I decided to find out who Kathy was. Fortunately, John seemed to have no idea that I knew about the affair. He continued to exchange lovey-dovey messages with Kathy without even setting a lock on his phone. From their messages, I was able to determine Kathy's address and full name. Kathy Brown? The name rang a bell, but where had I heard it? As I was desperately trying to remember, a photo of the two of them was sent to John's phone. When I saw the picture of Kathy, I inadvertently let out a gasp. Kathy was the daughter of the president of one of our clients. I had met her once at a company party, and her flashy dress had left a deep impression on me. I couldn't believe that John's affair was with Kathy. It was hard to believe, but the photo, name, and place all matched. There was no doubt about it. But Kathy, I remember the rumors about her. I had to tell John the truth. I told him I had something important to talk about and asked him to come home early. Unusually, John came home without protest and started talking before I could say anything. "I actually have something to tell you too," John said with a solemn look on his face. "My girlfriend is pregnant, so I've decided to leave you and be with her." What? He had taken the initiative before I could talk to him. His girlfriend must be Kathy. But she's pregnant? To my surprise, he said, "It's already decided. I've always been appeasing your father, but after meeting her, I realized how pointless my marriage life with you was. She is the one who's suitable for me, not a woman like you who has nothing to offer. She has everything." "So, you're divorcing me?" "Yeah, that's right. You need to leave this house." I asked John, thinking it was my last chance. "Are you sure about this? You won't regret it?" At that, John burst out laughing. "Regret? There's no way, right? Let me tell you something good. My girlfriend is the president's daughter. She's in a different league from your father, who's just an executive." "Didn't you respect my father?" "Respect? That's just a pose for promotion. If I marry her, I'll become the next president of her company. I can quit my current job anytime, huh? In other words, I no longer need to butter up your father." I don't mind if he ridicules me, but I thought he would be sincere about my father and his work. I can't believe he didn't even have that much sincerity. The moment I found out that, my feelings towards John cooled off. So, I won't say anything anymore. Do as you like. "Yeah, I'll do what I want to do. You don't have to tell me to do." Huh. Even though I didn't ask, John began to talk about her incessantly. "She never told me she was pregnant. Was she considerate of my marriage?" "Then how did you find out she was pregnant?" "I happened to find an echo picture in her bag. She probably intended to give birth alone out of consideration for me. What a courageous woman." Completely smitten with Kathy, John was determined to divorce me as soon as possible and proposed to her. He even prepared the divorce papers. If that's what John wants, it's actually convenient for me. I'm tired of seeing his face too. John signed the divorce paper with satisfaction and immediately submitted them to the court. After he was gone, I quickly packed my stuff and headed for my parents' house. And so, my married life with John ended just like that, I thought. The call from John to my mobile phone came the next night. "Lily, where are you now?" "Where? I'm at my parents' house. What's wrong?" "At your parents'. I see. Can you come by to the nearby diner right now? I have something important to talk about." "Why don't you come here if you have something to talk about?" "I can't do that. Please come. It's a request for a lifetime." Reluctantly, I headed to the designated diner. There was John, who had completely lost his energy. As soon as he saw my face, he said, "Lily, get back together with me." "What?" I got stunned, but John began to speak, painfully. "Actually, she turned down my proposal." I swallowed the words. I knew it. "She had a fiancé that her parents had arranged. From the beginning, I was just a game to her." "Yeah, I know." "Also, the child in her stomach wasn't mine." I had suspected that from the moment I heard she was pregnant. It was a well-known story in our company that Kathy was engaged to a rich man from another company. When I found out that Kathy was John's mistress, I tried to tell John about it, but before I could, John quickly dumped me and tried to switch to Kathy. There was no obligation to kindly tell him the truth. Knowing this would happen, I kept silent all along. "Kathy chose me as a playmate because I'm a married man, thinking there would be no strings attached. When I told her I divorced my wife, she coldly brushed me off, saying, 'Are you an idiot?'" I don't feel sorry for John, who was depressed. He brought it on himself. "Well, you can't compare to a rich young man, can you?" Then John looked at me in surprise. "How did you know that Kathy's fiancé is a rich young man?" I told John that Kathy is the daughter of our company's client. No one in the company doesn't know that Kathy is engaged to a rich young man. I never dreamed that you and Kathy were having an affair. You knew? Why didn't you tell me? I was going to tell you when I noticed you were having an affair with Kathy, but before I could, you told me to get out. Was that the important talk at that time? That's why I asked. Don't you regret it? You scoffed at me and answered, I don't. Remember? So I was relieved and able to easily tell my family the reason for the divorce. Huh. Did you tell this to your father, too? Of course I did. What have you done? It's not too late yet. Take back what you said. Tell him it was a mistake. Don't be foolish. It's too late. Dad is furious. Well, you don't care what my dad thinks about you now. That's not true. I'm telling you, I want to make amends. It's too late. I have no intention of starting over with you. I refuse to be with a man like you, who changes his marriage partner based on his parents' title. But, besides, your true nature is already exposed to my father. I've told him everything, including when you said, I can quit my current job anytime. Is that a lie? Actually, my father said, if so, I don't mind if he resigns right away. But I thought I could get into Kathy's company at that time. Haha, you're full of regrets. I told you to listen to my advice. I really regret it. So, could you give me another chance? Looking at John begging for another opportunity, I coldly declared, there are no more chances. It's your responsibility to take charge of what you've done. I added more fuel to the fire while John was feeling down. Oh, by the way, I finished reporting to my parents, so please, leave our house soon. What? You've been telling me to get out, but that house is what my father bought for me. The title should be in my name. Wait! I'm in trouble if you tell me to leave. Either way, you're going to move out soon. So what's the big deal? What do you mean? Let me see, you haven't been informed yet. You are being removed from your post in New York. What did you say? You're being relocated to a remote area. At least be grateful that they didn't fire you. My father, who was furious about my divorce, took a quick action. He immediately arranged for John to be transferred to a remote area far from New York. It was also a well-known department for layoff candidates. That's a mix of private and public issues. That's not true. Of course, my father was angry about our divorce, but the reason he removed you from the career track is for another reason. You don't have company loyalty or personal integrity. My father calmly judged that such a person should not be in the upper management of the company. You don't mind if your husband is driven to such a remote area? Ex-husband. You and I are strangers now. Lily, don't say such cold things. Aren't you getting lonely on your own? Huh? How naive can you be? You've been saying that you've been putting up with our married life, but it's the same for me. I've been turning a blind eye to your verbal abuse and affairs because I didn't want my father to be sad. I feel refreshed now that I'm released from that. Lily, don't say that. Help me. Shut up. Do your best in your unwanted duties in the remote area. I left my seat without listening to his words, and I left the diner without looking back once. I was wondering why I had been with such an insincere and pathetic man until now. Afterwards, I got help from a lawyer introduced by my father and got division of property. John, who wanted to hang on to the company somehow, paid the full amount immediately by using up his savings. I was grateful that I quickly received what I could get and completely cut ties with John. He, who had his savings depleted by the payment of damages, seems to be leading a rather simple life in the remote area. The most successful young person? That was a thing of the past. There's no trace of him now, and he seems to have aged all at once. On the other hand, I have been living a leisurely life since I broke up with John. When my previous company found out that I was divorced, they asked me, "We really want you to come back." They recognized me, not because of my father's connections. I was moved by that and decided to return to work. I've always liked my job, so I had no hesitation about going back. Perhaps because my father feels guilty about introducing me to a good-for-nothing man, he keeps bringing me potential suitors. But I'm turning them all down. If a good person appears someday, I might feel like getting married. But for now, I just want to enjoy this fulfilling single life a little longer. I returned to work and worked hard, so I have plenty of money. The life of enjoying both work and private life to the fullest seems to continue for a while.
My name is Jenna, and I've been married for 3 years now at the age of 30. My husband, Seth, who's 32, works at his family business. His family owns a wholesale liquor company where his father is the president and Seth serves as the director. Ever since we got married, I've been working there as well as an office clerk. My mother-in-law has never involved herself with the family business, having been a stay-at-home mom for the longest time. And when I say stay at home, she used to employ a housekeeper, so she never really had to lift a finger. When I married into the family and started living with my in-laws, they let the housekeeper go. Why would we need a housekeeper when we've got a daughter-in-law? My mother-in-law remarked, and both my father-in-law and husband seemed to agree with her. It seems my father-in-law, who has taken into his wife's family, has never been able to stand up to his wife. Growing up, Seth saw his father always obeying his mother's commands. It's as if he believes that obeying every word is the natural order of things. Even when we visited for the first time before we got married, it was evident that she was the one who ruled the house. Since becoming a part of this family, I've been burdened with both housework and office work. The alcohol wholesale business has been in a tight spot lately, and we can't afford to hire more staff, so I've been lending a hand. They had to let the housekeeper go because the money to pay her was running out. Nevertheless, this company, which has been around since my husband's grandfather's time, manages to keep going thanks to long-standing business relationships. The grandfather founded the company in his lifetime and expanded it to its current scale. There are about 10 employees who handle sales and deliveries, even delivering quite far away. The grandfather, having no son of his own, had my father-in-law, who was a promising employee, take over the business. He arranged for my father-in-law to marry his only daughter and entrusted the company to them. I never met this grandfather myself, but apparently he was a stern man. Dad is a patient man, Seth often says, praising his father. He never got angry, no matter what was said to him. Grandpa was pretty stern, but Mom is even more so. Seth, who accepts whatever his mom tells him, talks about it as if it's someone else's business. Until we got married and started living together, I couldn't have imagined this side of Seth. While we were dating, he seemed like a bit of a wild one, but at home, he becomes almost invisible. He's also lively and energetic at work, but turns quiet as soon as he gets home. The same is true for my father-in-law, who's bustling at the company, but becomes as quiet as a church mouse at home. I was shocked at first by their transformation, but now I find myself in the same boat. In this house, my mother-in-law is the absolute authority, and no one dares to defy her. When we first started living together, she made a huge fuss because she didn't like the food I made. The dinner I made casually was apparently too spicy for her, and she tossed it into the trash after just one bite. In a panic, I quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, was it too spicy?" My mother-in-law made me stand before her and began her lecture. "Are you trying to make me sick by making me eat something this spicy?" I was petrified by the sight of my mother-in-law's face, which looked like a demon. Seth and my father-in-law stopped eating their meals and sat rigidly, their eyes cast downwards. When I cast a fleeting glance at them for help, I saw Seth's face, even paler than mine. When I looked at my father-in-law, he too had a pale face, just like Seth. From their expressions, I could imagine how terrifying my mother-in-law's lectures were. After enduring more than 30 minutes of my mother-in-law's sermon, I had forgotten why she was angry in the first place. Even my angry mother-in-law seemed to have gotten hungry and ended up eating the meals I made. Seth and my father-in-law have always lived with my mother-in-law, so they've learned to live quietly at home. That's when I started to regret marrying into such a formidable family. When my mother-in-law was a young adult, her father's company was at its peak. An employee who had just been working for the company for a long time spoke nostalgically about it when he was retiring. Apparently, they had more than double the number of employees they have now, and their sales were incomparably higher. My mother-in-law had experienced this prosperous era and finds it hard to lower her standard of living. That's probably why she used to hire a housekeeper and never did any household chores herself. My mother-in-law loves shopping and often goes out, bringing back loads of things. I don't know how much money she spends, but given the company's current performance, it's starting to worry me. Seth and my father-in-law don't say anything about her shopping, so I keep my mouth shut too. If I made an ill-considered comment, I might get a lecture that lasts longer than 30 minutes. Before I knew it, I had started to think like Seth and my father-in-law. For about a year after our marriage, I was fully occupied trying to get used to the lifestyle in my husband's family and the work at the company. By the time 2 years had passed, I was facing a bigger problem. We were unable to have a child. Particularly, in my mother-in-law's mind, was her experience of not having a son in her father's generation and having to take in a son-in-law. She worries that the same thing should not happen in Seth's generation. As we approached our 3rd year of marriage, she started to make sarcastic comments every chance she got. When are you going to give us an heir? You didn't marry into this family to be an office clerk. Even the sight of a baby on TV would set her off. There are so many babies in the world. Why don't we have one here? She'd glare at me. Seth and my father-in-law would disappear whenever this topic started. Hearing this day after day, I began to feel there was no place for me in this family. I wished Seth would help. But no matter how many times I confided in him, he'd say, "Don't worry about it, just let it go." As if he didn't want to be involved. At the same time, the company's situation was deteriorating. My father-in-law's company, with its old-fashioned business style, was unable to get work from trendy eateries and the like. My mother-in-law seemed to sense this, even though Seth and my father-in-law didn't talk about it with her. Still, she couldn't stop her favorite activity, shopping, and brought home all sorts of things. Whether she was angry at herself, I don't know, but she'd come home from shopping in a bad mood. Then her anger would be directed at me. "It's Jenna's fault for not producing an heir. That's why I end up buying unnecessary things." My mother-in-law, who blamed me for incomprehensible reasons, seemed to pin all the blame on me. Perhaps because of her daily grumbles, my health started to fail. I asked Seth and my father-in-law to let me take a break from work and got tested at the hospital. Seth seemed hopeful that I might be pregnant, but it was due to stress. It would be best to rest a little in a relaxing environment. But there was no relaxing environment for me at present. Nor could I afford to rest. Knowing it was impossible, I explained the situation to Seth and my in-laws when I got home. The doctor said it would be better if I could rest a little, but it's okay. Surprisingly, my mother-in-law said, "You should go back to your parents' house and rest for a while." She even told my father-in-law, "We can manage, right? It seems like we're not so busy right now." It seemed like she was urging them to let me take a break from work. My father-in-law, surprised by my mother-in-law's words, replied, "We can cover for you. It's okay." With a relieved look on his face. I was shocked by my mother-in-law's unexpected words. At this time, I thought she might actually be a kind person. But that was a big mistake. She was just a person with a bad temper after all. The next day, I went back to my parents' house right away to rest. When I told them on the phone that I was coming back, they seemed very worried. When my mother saw me in person, she said, "You look pale and thin. Haven't you lost weight?" she asked with a voice on the verge of tears. "First, take some rest and recover." My father also welcomed me. He seemed to understand everything from my expression. He must have understood that things weren't going well with my in-laws because stress was the cause. I felt bad for worrying my parents by coming back home. My health improved quickly after I returned to my parents' house. Clearly, the environment at my in-laws' house was the cause of stress. About a week after I arrived at my parents' house, my in-laws suddenly showed up. I could understand if my husband Seth showed up, but I never thought my in-laws would come to my parents' house. My mother-in-law suddenly started yelling as soon as she arrived. "We're returning this good-for-nothing daughter-in-law who can't even bear an heir. It's up to the parents to take responsibility." Even my mother, who met her at the door, was too surprised to respond. My father rushed to the entrance and challenged her. "I can't let it go if you call my daughter a failure. What do you mean?" My mother-in-law fought back when my father immediately rebutted her. 3 years into marriage and still no baby. What's more, she's weak and can't work." My mother, finally regaining her composure, counterattacked. "Isn't Seth also responsible for not having a child?" My mother-in-law dismissed her with a snort, making baseless excuses. "There's nothing wrong with Seth. The problem lies with your daughter." My father, maintaining his composure against my mother-in-law's unreasonable remarks, said, "If you insist on that, we'll take our daughter back. Are you fine with Jenna leaving?" I, who didn't want to face my mother-in-law, was watching the situation from a place where they couldn't see me. My father glanced at me for confirmation. The image of Seth flashed in my mind, but I nodded. Seth hasn't visited me once since I came back home, and he can't stand up against his mother's remarks. There's a limit to calling someone a failure or trying to return them like some defective product. From now on, we'll have no relation with you. Please remember that." My father responded very politely. My father-in-law, hiding behind my mother-in-law, seemed like he wanted to say something. However, my mother-in-law cut him off. "We'll send the failure of a daughter-in-law's luggage later. We'll hire a divorce lawyer too." With that, my in-laws, who glared at my parents, left. Why didn't you say something more to such rude remarks? My mother, this time, turned on my father. Calming her down, he said, "There's no use talking to that woman. Don't worry. We'll make her realize her mistake through our actions, not words." My mother, not understanding what my father meant, was still furious. I, however, understood immediately. My father-in-law also knew, which is why he tried to say something. My father runs a restaurant chain and has a business relationship with my father-in-law's company. As someone who used to work in administration, I knew this. In fact, it was my father who introduced me to Seth. He had been doing business with my father-in-law's company since the time my grandfather-in-law was the president. My father's company, which started from a single store and struggled at first, received help from my grandfather-in-law. To this day, with a significantly larger number of stores, he procures all the alcohol and beverages from my father-in-law's company. To be honest, it seems cheaper to source from elsewhere, but they continue trading out of gratitude to my grandfather-in-law. Given that my father's company also runs an affiliated pub, it's a big account for my father-in-law's company. My mother-in-law, who didn't know about this, was able to maintain her attitude towards my father. The next day, my father called my father-in-law's company and told the person in charge, "We're ending all transactions with you." The flustered person in charge immediately reported to my father-in-law and Seth. My father-in-law, who had not anticipated that all transactions would be stopped, finally lost his temper with my mother-in-law. "Because of you, we have lost a major business deal." The normally gentle father-in-law's fury and the loss of a major deal seemed to have shocked my mother-in-law. "What? It's because of me?" My father-in-law explained to my mother-in-law that I am the daughter of a major client. When Seth and I got married, this was brought up, and my father-in-law thought my mother-in-law remembered it. She, who didn't care about business, had completely forgotten and only then remembered. "Now that you mention it, I vaguely recall something about it when Seth was getting married." Finally, grasping the severity of the situation, my mother-in-law was flustered. Seth also lashed out at her. "What were you thinking? Deciding on Jenna and my divorce on your own?" I had reported to Seth about my mother-in-law demanding a divorce from me. "I don't want a divorce. Moreover, if things continue this way, our company will collapse." Given that my father's company is a large client and profitable, if the transactions stop, they wouldn't be able to manage the business. Presently, all trading partners are demanding lower prices and they're hardly making any profit. My father's company, due to the relationship between my grandfather-in-law and my father, hadn't requested any price reduction. Such a relationship of trust seemed to be the only reason why my father introduced Seth to me. That evening, my in-laws and Seth came to my parents' house, but my father did not allow them inside. At the door, my father asked, "After all the disrespect, what brings you here today?" His anger was evident, as my father-in-law apologized from the bottom of his heart and pleaded, "We are sorry for our behavior yesterday. Could we ask you to reconsider our trade relationship?" Despite his plea, my father didn't seem to lend an ear. "We were trading out of respect for the former president. But let's end it now," my father said. And my father-in-law apologized over and over again. Then Turning to Seth and my mother-in-law, he said, "You two should apologize as well." Prompted by my father-in-law, both seemed unwilling. Moreover, my mother-in-law stated, "Why do we have to go this far? Let's just give up and find another trading partner," expressing her refusal to prostrate. Seth also followed suit. "There's no need for us to apologize, as Mom said." They wouldn't listen to my father-in-law. Seeing Seth's attitude, my father became even angrier. "Seth, I am disappointed in you. Why didn't you defend my daughter?" At my father's words, Seth couldn't respond and kept his gaze low. "Because you always do whatever my mother-in-law says. I've been suffering." Without thinking, I rushed to the entrance and finally voiced my feelings towards Seth. Seth tried to speak, but watching my mother-in-law's facial expression, he couldn't say anything. Seeing him like this, I decided that divorce was the only option. Until now, I thought we might be able to mend things, but even that tiny hope vanished completely. "I'll pick up my belongings later," I told Seth clearly. My mother-in-law didn't seem to like this attitude of mine and started making a fuss. "Yes, that's right. Seth needs to get a divorce from you quickly and find a new bride." My mother-in-law, who had come to apologize, started to badmouth me again. "This time we'll get a bride who isn't a failure and can give us a successor." With that, she loudly walked out of our house alone. Seth immediately followed her. My father-in-law, who was left behind, was urged by my father to stop apologizing. "I've made my decision. I'm going to close the company and leave the house." Surprising both my father and me. "Is your business situation that bad?" my father asked, and my father-in-law responded with a bitter smile. "I've been considering closing down the company for a few years now, due to continued losses. While I knew their situation was tough, I didn't think it was that serious. I worked hard to leave the company to my son, but it was all in vain with him behaving like this," hunching his back as he left. The next day, when I went to pick up my stuff from my in-laws' house, nobody was there. As I was moving my belongings and about to show up at the company, I found a great uproar. Creditors who heard rumors of the bankruptcy were swarming, and my father-in-law and Seth were handling them. I left without greeting anyone. A few days later, my father-in-law's company declared bankruptcy. My mother-in-law, who had a large amount of debt, filed for personal bankruptcy and ran away with Seth. It seems Seth intends to follow his mother wherever she goes. My father-in-law is looking for re-employment for the remaining employees. I wish Seth could have thought about the employees until the end like his father did. Back home for a rest. I became well again. I never thought I would get a divorce during my convalescence. Seeing me depressed after the divorce, a friend who was worried about me introduced me to a man. This man, who has firm beliefs, captivated me. After about a year of dating, we got married, and we were blessed with a baby. When I got pregnant easily, something I had been hoping for so long, I thought the problem must have been with Seth. Now, I can laugh about it. But at the same time, I was so troubled that it affected my health. Perhaps a peaceful environment was good for me. In any case, now I can't wait for the arrival of our baby.
Look, I don't want to see my sister like this either. But you're her sister-in-law. It's okay for you, right?
Well, actually, my name is Susan. My husband, Tom, and I have been together since high school, and we recently got married. When I say that, people often ask, so you were classmates? But we actually went to different schools. We met when I visited my close friend, Mila's house after a club meeting in high school, and Tom was there. So I've known Tom's family for a long time, and we're pretty close. Mila, who technically is my sister-in-law now, I still call her Mila like before, not sis. Our relationship has always been good, and it's remained that way even after moving in together. Before Tom and I got married, our workplaces were quite far from each other, so I was planning to quit my job when we got married. We were actually planning to rent an apartment near Tom's parents' place.
Susan, I'm sorry. I've been so busy with work that I haven't had time to look for a place. Can we live with my parents until things settle down?
This is how we ended up living with his family right after our marriage. Well, I do bear some responsibility for this, since I was totally fine with moving back to our hometown. Besides, Tom works in his family's business, so living with them would make things easier. With that in mind, I gladly agreed to move in. I was confident that I could live with my husband's family without any problems. They lived in the countryside, so I haven't found a job here. So now I'm supporting Tom and his parents, who are self-employed, every day. I do housework and occasionally help with their business. Mila lives nearby, and she gets days off on weekdays, so she comes to see me from time to time. I have someone to talk to, and I think I'm having a pretty fulfilling day. But there was a problem even in such peaceful days. One day, suddenly, Mila started acting strange. She started to forget things more often, and her face clearly changed from before. Even I, who doesn't see her very often, noticed it. It seems that Mila also noticed it herself. I went to the hospital. They said I have early onset Alzheimer's. I'm scared. One day, Mila confided in me like this at my husband's family home. Of course, neither Tom's parents nor Tom knew anything about the disease. But if she has Alzheimer's, living alone would be difficult. In a rush, Tom's parents took over her house somewhat forcefully and decided to live with her. And that's when my days of hardship began. Even after starting to live with Mila, Tom and his parents were indifferent to providing care for her.
We have work to do. Can't help it.
Well, go make money, so we'll leave Mila to you. With that, they eagerly headed to their store. At first, I thought they must be busy with their business, but the three were clearly avoiding their responsibility to look after Mila.
I'm old, and work is tough. I can't take care of Mila, too.
I don't want to see my daughter change. Sorry, Susan.
After getting married, I have to provide for us as the breadwinner. Leave the money-making to me. In return, I want you to take care of the house. It's important for a couple to share roles, right?
They would say such things, leaving me to take care of Mila while the three watched TV. Mila wasn't entirely unconscious. Seeing the three of them like that made her look sad. I'm sorry, Susan. I'm sorry. Seeing Mila cry like this, I was at a loss. But the situation got even worse. Unbelievably, Tom and his parents had secretly signed a contract for a new home, and they were preparing to move.
We're tired from work. If we had an Alzheimer's daughter, we wouldn't have time to rest.
You should continue to stay here and look after Mila. It's fine since you're only doing housework anyway, right? We won't push you too hard, so we'll spare you the housework at our new house.
You were always close to my sister, so it's not a problem, right? It's not like she's a stranger. We'll send plenty of money for living expenses. Take care.
With that, the three really left. Of course, Mila and I were left behind. All three of them seem to go to their store every day, but they don't ever come by to see us. Even if they see me, they don't even ask about Mila. That's when I finally realized that the three had completely ran away from looking after Mila. And I was stunned at my own situation. What's going to happen to me? From what I found out, early onset Alzheimer's can't be completely cured, though the progression of symptoms can be suppressed. Will I continue to look after Mila forever? If so, I won't be able to find another job. Right now, I have a lump sum of money that Tom left. He said he would keep sending some more. But will they really continue to make payments forever? I couldn't trust the people who abandoned Mila. Moreover, the money I've received isn't enough to live on without working for the rest of my life. I must work outside, but I can't leave Mila alone at home to go hunt for jobs. Maybe I should rely on public welfare, but even when I look it up on the internet, there are too many technical terms to understand the whole process. Above all, my brain isn't functioning due to lack of sleep. It was during my despair that it happened. Finally, it worked! A vibrant voice was heard. There's no way! But I looked at Mila. There she was, with a much stronger expression than before. Of course, she didn't look like she was suffering from Alzheimer's at all. Surprised, I listened as Mila explained. Susan, I'm sorry to surprise you. I actually don't have early onset Alzheimer's. I haven't even been to the hospital. I was wondering what I'd do if they asked me to show them a diagnosis. They believed me based on only my words and my condition. Well, it's expected. They didn't even try to take me to the hospital. Mila, why would you lie like that? Actually, Tom said something outrageous before you guys got married. He said, I'm going to force my wife to live with us, so you guys can use her however you want. And both my father and mother agreed to this. That's when I knew things were not right. According to Mila, it wasn't that Tom was too busy to look for an apartment. He simply didn't bother because he wanted to force me to move into his parents' home. In the meantime, it seemed he had been secretly discussing how to make his wife work like a maid with his parents. At first, I thought he was just trying to be a big guy in front of our parents, since he was about to get married. But I was wrong. He never really looked for a new place, and even after you guys got married, he clearly became a misogynistic husband. He was saying terrible things behind your back. So, while it wasn't my place to interfere, I couldn't stand seeing my dear sister-in-law being treated like this. That's why I decided to expose their true colors. Mila talked to her friends about this, and she decided to pretend to have early onset Alzheimer's. Normally, her parents would step in to provide care, but that wasn't the case. Just as Mila predicted, they pushed all the care onto me, and they ran away from home, leaving only some money behind. When she told me all this, I finally understood. I thought I wouldn't have to worry because I was living in a house I've known since childhood. I convinced myself I was happy because I didn't have any severe mother-in-law and daughter-in-law problems. But it was different. From the time I got married until I had this conversation with Mila, I was never truly happy. I couldn't be alone with Tom, and I was constantly busy with housework. Even when I was doing housework late into the night, no one said anything. Oh, you're not done yet? That's tough. Good night.
You're really inefficient. Are you sure you'll be okay like this?
I was told things like this, but since there was no clear verbal abuse, I didn't realize I was unhappy. Susan, you always put yourself last. But I figured they'd run away right away. Plus, they run their own business, so they care about their reputation. So I thought they would leave some money behind. That way, I thought I could give you some freedom. At those words, I remembered. Indeed, Mila had been pretending to act strange. To a stranger, she might look sick, but she only forgot things and didn't burden me with personal care like toilet or bath assistance. That must have been because she was considerate of me. Mila's actions gave me courage. There's someone who cares about me so much. Now, I wanted to repay her for looking out for me. After that, I started preparing to move and looked for jobs without telling Tom and his parents. Mila continued to pretend to be ill only when the three of them came, but she secretly helped me with all my moving preparations wholeheartedly. Originally, the three of them never came to see how Mila was doing at home, so both moving preparations and job hunting went smoothly. Then, 1 month after learning the truth, I found a good place to move to and a new job. Then we decided to tell the three of them everything when they came to work at their store, which was right by our place. Actually, I was planning to sneak out, but... I was thinking of leaving quietly. You're too soft, Susan. We have to make them regret all that they did to you. These were Mila's words that made me determined to tell them. Of course, the three who found out the truth were furious.
What are you thinking, sis? How I treat my wife is none of your business.
That's right. A wife is supposed to serve her husband's family by doing household chores. I've done the same.
I never thought you were such a terrible daughter, but I no longer consider you my daughter. I don't recognize Susan as our daughter-in-law either. Return all the living expenses you took from us, and don't ever come back to this house. That's right. How can I stay married to someone like you? Divorce me and get out. Oh, and of course, return the money.
That's right. Money is important. Please give it back. The three of them all told me to return the money, but Mila took out a piece of paper. Do you remember this? This is the note you left when you dumped me on Susan and left.
That is...
Written on it was, we're giving you this money as living expenses, so please take care of our daughter. Out of habit as entrepreneurs, all three of them left their signatures and personal seals on the note. With this, they can't say that I took their money on my own. I wonder what would happen if I take this and leave. I'm not sure this is legally binding, but I think it's worse for you guys if the neighborhood finds out. Running away after dumping your sick daughter on your daughter-in-law as entrepreneurs? What would people say about you guys?
You're
so wicked!
That's right. You're cheating, sis.
The three of them complained, but seemed unable to say anything more. After all, the three of them had indeed dumped their sick daughter and their daughter-in-law and fled to a new home. They had left me with more than enough money for my living expenses, but their reputation will be tarnished. Then I filled out the divorce papers that Mila had prepared for me and Tom. And then we went to the city hall to submit them together with the 5 of us. In contrast to me and Mila, who were feeling refreshed, the 3 of them had gloomy expressions. However, it was their actions that had caused all this. I had no room for sympathy.
Hey, Susan, can't we start over? If you don't like living together, I can look for an apartment somewhere. If you don't want to be near my parents, I can change jobs. So, please don't abandon me.
What are you talking about? It's not about living together or being self-employed. That's not why I'm changing jobs.
Then why?
You don't get it, do you? This time, Tom, you were about to abandon Mila, right? And you were laughing while watching me suffer. I got sick of that cowardly nature of yours.
That's...
Tom was depressed, but that couldn't be helped. Rather, I was appalled that Tom didn't understand the reason for my anger until I told him. Why did I live with people like this? To be honest, I was full of regret. But anyway, Mila and I managed to move out of my in-laws' house. Moreover, unbeknownst to me, it seemed that Mila had been laying some groundwork in our neighborhood. Actually, I've been ill recently. Yet my family abandoned me, leaving Tom's wife to care for me. Despite that, she took great care of me.
Huh? Is that so? I had indeed noticed something off recently. Are you okay now?
Yes, it's all thanks to her. But after this, I've had enough of my family. So I decided to run away with her. I'd be scared if they abandoned me when I fall ill again.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good decision. Can't trust a family that won't help in tough times. So, you two are leaving together? Both of you take care.
Yes, thank you. But really, who would have thought they were such people? You can't judge a book by its cover, huh? Kinda hard to trust. Mila's groundwork had an enormous impact. After all, she was seen being pushed around the neighborhood in a wheelchair by me. The 3 members of my in-laws' family didn't even offer to push her in her wheelchair. Besides, the neighborhood had noticed them visiting the store every morning and evening. It had started some gossip about what was really going on. That's why they believed Mila's words. The rumors spread rapidly once we left. Now they seem to be living in a state of ostracism.
Mila, what have you done? Come back and explain properly.
Yes, we can't run the business. What are you going to do about it?
Sis, this is too much. Help us, and try to convince Susan to reconcile while you're at it.
Such texts came in on Mila's phone almost daily. Of course, nobody would shop at a business that was being ostracized. Mila doesn't seem to plan on helping them, so their business will probably continue to struggle. But still, I can't find it in me to sympathize with them at all. As for me, I'm doing my best at my new job. A new location, new relationships, a new job. There are many exhausting things, but it's still way more fulfilling than living with my in-laws. Plus, sharing a room with Mila is more fun than I expected. We maintain just the right distance while doing housework and occasionally eat together. Living together and helping each other is really great. After all this, I absolutely do not want to get remarried. If my days continue like this, I wouldn't need another partner anyway. Right now, I just want to continue living happily.
I got rid of all of your stuff because you decided to go home without telling me. When I returned from caring for my mother back home, these shocking words were thrown at me by my husband. A quick look around the house confirmed that none of my personal belongings were anywhere in sight. Why would you do such a thing? You left me here all alone to go back home. It's your fault for not listening to me. With that, my husband flung the newspaper he was reading at me. I let out a heavy sigh at his childish behavior. My name is Lucy. I am due to retire at the age of 65 this year, but have accepted an offer to continue working till I'm 70. My husband Joshua and I were introduced by mutual friends. We married 2 years ago. Both of us had been previously divorced and we didn't have any children together. Living as a couple in our late 50s turned out to be more exciting than we'd anticipated, despite our busy work lives. However, ever since my husband retired a year ago and started staying at home, his attitude towards me has slowly changed. From the start of our marriage, he has been somewhat dominant at home. Constant complaints and snide remarks about my housekeeping have worn me down emotionally. As we were newlyweds, I was concerned about our lives in old age. Divorce wasn't an option back then, no matter how tough things got. Well, dinner? I haven't seen someone in such a long time, I'm definitely going. I received a call on my cell phone from a friend from college, inviting me for a meal after not seeing each other for several years. We were all so busy that we hardly had the chance to get together, so I immediately accepted the invitation. We agreed to have lunch together the following Sunday. I was looking forward to meeting my old friends and worked hard to make it that day. To make sure I arrived on time for our meeting, I left the house. While my husband, who usually sleeps until noon since his retirement, was still asleep, I left a handwritten note before heading out. Sorry to keep you waiting, you're all early. I planned to arrive 15 minutes early, but my friends were already there. We just got too excited and arrived too early. Today, 2 of my high school friends, who also attended the same college with me, were joining. We've been the best of friends. As our chatter was blooming, it was time for our reservation, so we headed to the restaurant. It was a casual and welcoming place. Since I was always busy with work, I rarely had the opportunity to visit places like this, which made me very happy. I haven't been to a place like this since my youth. You're exaggerating. Let's come here as many times as you want after you retire. But you extended for 5 more years, right? People who can work are different. We don't have to wait until I retire. We're going to have lots of fun from now on. Various dishes were served, and we savored them. We reminisced about our student days and discussed our thoughts at our current age, having a wonderful time. It's been a long time since I laughed this much. I haven't had a restful moment at work or at home for a while. As I thought about this, a hurried sound of door opening and a panicked voice from the restaurant staff caught my attention. Wait, isn't that man Lucy's husband? You're right. He's coming this way. What? No way. Hearing my friend's words and looking towards the commotion, I found my husband with a devilish look on his face heading towards us. I instinctively looked away, but the next moment all the dishes on the table were knocked to the floor by my husband. The sound of the plate shattering echoed throughout. In the middle of the uproar in the restaurant, the first to speak was my husband. Why did you go out without preparing my meal? What? What are you talking about? You always manage to eat without me making anything. I'm talking about today, and you're wasting money in a place like this. It's my money I earned, and I'm free to spend it how I want, right? Shut up. You don't talk back to me. You'll lose your income when you retire at 70. I'm telling you to save it. My husband's absurd argument made me raise my voice, but realizing this was a public place, I recoiled and made myself small. Not only my friends, but also the other customers and staff were taken aback and were staring at us. Feeling embarrassed and angry, my face turned red. Then one of my friends stood up. Why are you here all of a sudden? We're just friends gathering for a meal. As a husband, I think you should understand that much. That's right. Just because you're married doesn't mean you have the right to control her, they said, glaring at him. Relieved at my friend's support, I looked at my husband. It was evident that he was trembling with rage. Apparently, he was so angry that he did something unthinkable. He took water from the next table and splashed it at my 2 friends. Ah! Hey, what are you doing? I stood rigid, aghast at what had just happened, merely watching my drenched friends. It's because of people like you who take her out that her housework gets neglected. With that, my husband yanked my hand and dragged me out of the restaurant. All the while, the restaurant was buzzing with commotion, and I could not bring myself to raise my voice. Days later, I called my friends to apologize. I'm truly sorry.
It's not your fault, Lucy. It's clearly your husband who's in the wrong. To be frank, you should leave him. You'll be constrained in everything you do from now on.
My friend said this with an awkward look, but I also thought that I needed to rethink my relationship with my husband after this incident. Joshua has changed, but I can't bring myself to cut ties. Even though I knew in my head that I needed to leave, I was already emotionally attached to my husband after just a few years together. But, as if to mock my feelings, my husband took an outrageous action again. Given the recent incident, I figured I would be able to go out without telling my husband anymore, so I decided to go shopping with him. Do you have any plans today, dear? I'm retired now, so of course I don't. Are you making fun of me? No, that's not it. I was thinking of going shopping. Would you like to come with me? I guess I have no choice. We headed to the shopping center, where we could find anything we needed. Even while driving, my husband looked sullen and seemed to be in a bad mood. We're here. We're here. What did you come to buy? I came to buy my mom's pajamas and such today. The ones she's wearing now have gotten old. When I answered this way, my husband let out a heavy sigh. Why do I have to shop for your mother? He ended up not even getting out of the car. I had no choice but to shop alone. When I quickly returned to the parking lot, not only the car, but also my husband was gone. Thinking it was strange, I called my husband multiple times, but he didn't answer. Could it be he went home first? I searched around for a while, but I couldn't find my husband in the end. Since I didn't have money for a taxi fare, I ended up walking home. It was a 1-hour walk carrying bags. Being nearly 60 years old and lacking in regular exercise, I had to take several breaks and eventually arrived home in 2 hours. When I got home, my husband was laughing heartily while watching TV and drinking beer. When he noticed my return, he looked at the exhausted me and laughed again as if mocking me. How many hours did it take you to get back? That's because you left me there. Why would you go home all of a sudden? Your shopping isn't my concern. Now hurry up and make dinner. He said, then he leaned back on the sofa and turned his attention back to the television. I'm not done talking. Even when I shouted at him, he ignored me. Being repeatedly subjected to my husband's selfishness, my frustration reached a boiling point. At this time, when I was feeling mentally drained, I received a call from my mother's home care nurse informing me that my mother had fractured a bone. My 87-year-old mother had been living alone since my father passed away, and usually as a helper to assist with daily life. Apparently, she had accidentally tripped over the entrance's step, and I was told she would need constant care for a while. You see, my mom fractured a bone and needs care. I'm going. Hey, wait, what about my dinner? And besides, she should be fine on her own with just a fracture. What are you saying? My mother is elderly. If we leave her as she is, she won't be able to walk or eat on her own. As I argued back against my husband's selfish remarks and prepared to go to my parents' home, he said something unbelievable. If we leave her alone, won't someone from the other side come to pick her up? Then we wouldn't have to deal with her anymore, right? He smirked as if enjoying my reaction. You're despicable. Ignoring him, I stormed out of the house. I could hear unbearable insults being thrown at me from behind, but they no longer reached my ears. I had been holding back, but after hearing him talk about my mother in such a way, something inside me exploded. At that moment, I decided to take revenge. For a week, I stayed at my parents' home to take care of my mother. As expected, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from my husband, but I ignored them all. While concentrating on my mother's care, I couldn't help worrying about my future life. I could continue working until I'm 70, so I can work for another 5 years. However, I was prepared to quit my job for my mother. Knowing that just thinking won't help, I decided to return home once to discuss the future with my husband. When I arrived home, the front door was unlocked and my husband was sitting on the living room sofa with his arms crossed. "I'm back," I hesitantly called out to him, and the words that came out of his mouth were unbelievable. "I threw away all your belongings because you went to your parents' house without permission." "What?" In a panic, I looked around the house. Indeed, all my personal belongings had vanished. My clothes from my wardrobe, my cosmetics from the bathroom, everything. The album with precious memories of my mother seemed to have been discarded as well. Why would you do such a thing? Where did you throw them? Give them back. What's with the attitude? If you can't listen to me, then get out. What? Whether it was because I was being defiant, he was irritated and hit the table. Seriously, you incorrigible man. I wonder if my mom had seen through your character. Having lost the energy to even get angry, I sighed heavily and looked down at my seated husband. Our marriage certificate. Huh? What are you talking about? Our marriage certificate. My husband, who hadn't expected to hear that, widened his eyes in surprise. We didn't submit it, right? Us? In fact, my mother was strongly opposed to my marriage to him. Looking back, I wondered if she had sensed something about my husband back then. She adamantly refused to permit our marriage. There were also circumstances at work where it were more convenient for me to keep my maiden name, so we had discussed waiting until each of us retired to submit the marriage certificate. We were in common law marriage. So we're not legally husband and wife? That's right. We even had separate insurance cards. And I had been left to handle all official documents. You must have completely forgotten about the existence of the marriage certificate, so you threw it away, didn't you? I coldly stated this, staring at my husband, still seated on the sofa. Since we haven't submitted the marriage certificate, we're not legally a couple. Plus, I built this house before we got married. Wait, you can't be serious. Indeed, I am serious. The one who needs to leave is you, Joshua. I can't live with someone as horrible as you. Wait, hold on. You've changed since you retired, Joshua. If it was just the nasty things you did to me, I could still forgive you, but it's unacceptable for you to badmouth my friends and mother. Wait, I was just jealous. You can still work while I can't. And you even said that you can work for another 5 years with re-employment. I was planning to work in the same department even after my retirement. But the company told me to move to an insignificant department. I couldn't swallow my pride. When I refused, they simply cut me off at the age of 65. As he said this, he hung his head and glanced sideways at me. He probably expected me to gently encourage him, as I used to do in such times. But none of that matters now. I went to the kitchen to get a garbage bag, and just as my husband had done with my belongings, I began to throw his things into it, one after another. I delivered the final blow to my husband, who was stunned by the scene. You seem to be relying on my income and savings after your retirement, but since we're not a couple, I want you to leave this house. You'll have to get by on your own from now on. Wait, I apologize for everything, so please don't kick me out. It's too late for regrets now. Goodbye. And so I managed to take my revenge on my husband and became free. After that, my husband lost his place to live, and as he was wasteful with money, his savings are almost zero, so he's living a very poor life. Of course, he can't make a living on pension alone, and given his high pride, even finding re-employment seems hopeless. He's said to be eking out a living with daily part-time jobs. He's been disliked by his relatives for a long time, so there's no one to help him. This is truly reaping what you sow. On the other hand, I started living with my mother. I was worried about my mother's health, and since her home was getting old, I invited her to live in this house. I manage to balance my work and caregiving with the help of understanding from my workplace and using caregiving services. It's very busy, but I'm living fulfilling and enjoyable days every day.